I think if you look at it historically, the movement of refugees and immigrants from one part of the world to another has been part of human history for 2,000-3,000 years. And it's good to look at it like that, because then you get a proper perspective on the scale of what is happening now compared to the past. I mean, the entire modern world, virtually, is the product of people moving from one country to the other, especially the country in which we happen to be now. I mean, what would the United States be if it weren't for the huge number of migrants that came from all over Europe during times of grave economic crisis in Europe? The middle of the 19th century in Germany, the continuing crises in Italy, especially from the southern regions, etc., etc. Why do they come, these refugees? Because if you destroy their countries, what are they to do? It's not that they only come to Europe. If you look at the refugee crisis in the Middle East, a tiny country like Lebanon is overfull, Jordan is overfull, the Iraqi refugees from the Iraq war, lots of them used to go to Syria. Now you have double refugees. The Iraqi refugees who went to Syria are now joined by the Syrian refugees, looking for homes, looking for shelter, looking for somewhere to live where their children can grow up without bombs. So when NATO decides to go and wage wars, it should factor this in. One Arab country you're going to destroy, expect at least 1 million refugees in Europe and tell people that is what is going to happen. Maybe it'll make them think then about these wars in the first place. Completely crazed wars, irrational wars, which have now gone on longer than the First and Second World Wars put together. In the American presence in Iraq and Afghanistan, just count the years. Much, much longer than the two wars which people mainly talk about because they affect Europeans and North Americans, the world wars. Gone on much longer. Afghan refugees, many of them are in Pakistan. That country has been seriously destabilized. So it's not just that they come to Europe. They go where they can find peace. But precisely because peace now is an empty word in large parts of the Middle East. Look what's happening in the Yemen, for instance, the Saudi invasion of Yemen. The refugees come. And the Europeans, with some exceptions, by and large reject them. You can't. It's an interesting contradiction, which I'll put like this. Curiously enough, if you read the main voices of the European bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, the Economist and the Financial Times, they are solidly for the refugees to come. No problem at all. The left, which is normally in favor of regulation, regulate capital, planning, etc., is for free entry as well. But there is a contradiction, because given the scale of the economic crisis in Europe, it's not that there is no room. Room can always be found if Europe shares the burden, which it refuses to do completely. So now we have a situation where the Turkish government, not one of the more democratic governments in NATO, to put it mildly, has been given 6 billion to take the refugees back. Most of the refugees fear going back to Turkey, and God knows where the money will end up. We can all make guesses. But it's not going to all end up to look for refugees or provide them with housing or certain basic amenities. This process is now made far worse by basically the completely dehumanized way in which the refugees are being treated. I mean, the Greece crisis itself, without refugees, is horrific enough, an internal crisis in Greece. It's horrific for Greek people. So, to expect them to just accept this is unless they're given a massive amount of subsidies. I mean, the Greeks have been amongst the kindest in the early days of the refugee crisis. But the sinister aspects of this crisis is that it is fueling the rise of the right and extreme right all over Europe. One has to understand this and see how it can be dealt with. A country like Germany, where this phenomenon didn't exist, you now have a party which has won, I think, 10% or over 10% of the vote, party which we have to describe in many ways as an extreme right party, but whose membership includes conservatives, former social democrats from the German social democracy, etc., etc. This has become the war cry of the right: keep the refugees out, not stop what we are doing so that refugees don't need to move, don't need to come. But this has become a big battle cry, also in Britain, also in France, on a big scale, and by and large in Europe as a whole. So it's not an easy problem to deal with, and it's not a simple problem. And the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, when she accepted the refugees, everyone said, what is happening? Unbelievable. But it was done on a whim, it has to be said. You know, it was her gut instinct. And when you're in power too long, you start behaving like a monarch. I wanted to do it. But the crisis that has ensued shows that a bit more planning should have gone on for these particular refugees to come in than the way she did it, because you had to withdraw very quickly, and then that withdrawal again fuels right-wing anger. We were right, you see, she's now had to do it. So there is no plan devised by the European Union. And in any case, many, even if they did it, which they did initially, we will take so many, it hasn't happened because they're too scared of their own populations to go, to go in for this. In my opinion, the only way we can insist that the refugee crisis needs to be solved is through an effective all-European plan, saying it's not a question of what you want, this is the decision we have made, but they are incapable, I think, at the moment of doing it. The EU is particularly paralyzed by the economy and the economic crisis in Europe, and they can't insist on it. Then we have to insist, at least don't let people die and drown in the Mediterranean. That is also what is taking place and happening, and even a religious figure like the Pope has come out very strongly denouncing Europe for what is being done at the moment. I'll stop there.